Beverly sends her regards that she can't be here this time. She's out of town. But we're super excited to meet Laura for this lunch and learn series. We've represented Laura for years or so now, and it's been incredible to watch her progress and her style kind of change and evolve. She just finished up her Atelier in New York. She just finished up at the Grand Central Atelier, which is a major accomplishment. Super, super cool for her to have gone out to music and done that, and applaud her for really taking that initiative to improve her work. And so we do represent Laura. I've got several of all the things hanging in that front house with her. We've got the work here afterwards, and the rest of the week, if you're interested in purchasing any of the work or supporting her, we are going to offer 20% off. Have you and I was a little bit nervous, but I see so many familiar faces, so many people I know, and I just want to thank you all so much. It's just so comforting and reassuring to look out and see old friends. So thank you so much, and those of you I haven't met, thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to talk. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit before we start the demo. So I was just saying, if you want to stay at your table and keep eating, you don't have to be in a special spot for a little while, but I've got a lot to share. I've got a lot of background information. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Atelier experience and my experience before I started talking art. But before I get started, I just want to know who's out here. How many people in the audience have taken an art class, have painted, would consider themselves any kind of artist? You could raise your hand. Oh, wow. Okay, great. Okay, that's good. Because I don't want to get too technical if I'm, talking to people that are patrons and maybe they want to learn about art, but they don't really want to know. I can get pretty technical. All right. And I've got notes here, but you're mainly just to rein me in. I know my stuff. I just have a tendency about it, so I got to bring myself in here. So over the past, I want to talk about the Atelier movement, my experience with Grand Central Atelier, and then when I do my demo, I want to share with you a couple of things that I learned when I was in New York that were really helpful. And I've got handouts over here that I'll give out later, but over the past 25 plus years, there's been a growing movement of what is called classical realism. There's also been a growing movement of impressionism and plein air painting. They've all really taken off. A lot of it has to do with the internet. And when I say classical realism, when you see the word classical, it refers to anything that has its roots in ancient Greece. And so the classical realism movement attempts to draw by way of the 19th, the Greeks were known for architecture and sculpture really more than painting, but they had these canons of proportion and these amazing sculptures, and the Romans borrowed from the Greeks. And then in the 19th century, there was a classical resurgence. And so they borrowed from the Romans. And there has been a tradition that has been handed down over the centuries. The Romans actually, the Renaissance artists actually went out and painted from Greek and Roman sculptures and made little notebooks, and they used those for reference material when they were doing their paintings. The word atelier means artist studio or workshop, and the atelier started in the Middle Ages, more towards the Renaissance, when, as part of their training, artists would study with another artist in their studio in an atelier, in addition to perhaps going to an academy like the Beaux-Arts or the equivalent in Spain or the equivalent in the Netherlands and Amsterdam. Or they would do both, like Johnson or Sargent studied at the Cold those arts in Paris, but he also studied in the atelier of Carolus Duran. If anybody's ever taken a class with McNeil, you know, he talks about that famous portrait that Johnson or Sargent did of his instructor, Carlos Duran, at, I guess, age 20, and he surpassed the teacher with his first painting. So it's a really famous and beautiful portrait, but he studied in the atelier of Carolus Duran. So today's ateliers are drawing back to the 19th century of France, where painting and painting techniques kind of reached a pinnacle, and they were so refined and so skillful that they almost got caught up in skill for skill's sake. And that was one of the things that caused the pendulum to start to swing away into Impressionism. But there are artists now that, a lot of people now that feel like with the postmodern art movement, starting with Impressionism onto the modern art world of postmodern, that a lot of things have gotten lost. Especially at university art programs, and I don't know if any of you have taken art classes at universities, but their classical training is now very bare bones basic. You just get the most minimal drawing and painting skills. And, you know, the figure painting in the 19th century ateliers and academies, they would have poses that they would spend 20 hours on. And nowadays, if you go to a figure painting class, you're lucky to get 4 hours and the model stays away. And forget good lighting, you know, proper lighting or anything like that. So there are a lot of artists who want to bring back that instruction, to keep that tradition of passing the information all the way back, you know, all the way back to the Greeks, and then trying to preserve that knowledge. And what the other things that's been lost in the modern day is there are no standards. And there's so much emphasis on individual expression that sometimes there's so much novelty that, well, I mean, frequently there's so much novelty in the art that there is no skill. Because you don't really acquire skill unless you do something over and over and refine it. And when you're doing something new and different and recreating art every time you do a painting, you're not really skillful. But so I mentioned the canons of proportion that the Greeks had. They defined what beauty was, and it was very idealized. And there was a joke. So Liz and I are studying French on Duolingo, and one of our stories was about this in French. This little art student, it was art class, and she hadn't done her art homework. And the teacher called on her, she didn't have her art homework. And she's like, I don't want to show you my art. It's none of it. It's terrible. It's terrible. And the teacher's like, no, I want to see it. I want to see it. She's like, no, I really don't want to see my painting. You can see my painting. It's really, really bad. So he demanded to see the painting. And so she gave him a blank piece of paper. The artist went wild. The teacher went wild. It was such an amazing painting. All the superlatives that he used in describing this painting that was so amazing. And that's kind of what, you know, sometimes you kind of feel like a little bit. I'm not saying there's not great fun art out there, but there's just a desire to regain some skill and to regain the lost knowledge. So two of the main ateliers, oldest and biggest, would be the Florence Academy and then Grand Central, where I studied. The Florence Academy has a studio in Florence, one in Sweden, Florence, Italy, not Alabama. And they used to have one in Jersey City, but it recently closed. But Jordan Sokol and Maya Murphey, who headed up the Jersey City Florence Academy, they're now the New York Academy of Art. And I don't know if you even know Pia Leedy, who shows her work here, so she's affiliated with the New York Academy of Art. So that was a great game for the New York Academy of Art, and Maya and Jordan are amazing artists. But if you go to to the mission statement of the Florence Academy, which is one of the oldest modern contemporary ateliers, they say, throughout the 20th century, prominent movements of art have steadily drawn attention and teaching away from close observation of nature and the acquisition of strong technical skills to a position where cohesive artistic thought is fragmented by the urge towards greater individual expression. So two things have been lost, standards and skill, which begins with direct observation of nature. And it's basically the pendulum swinging. You know, you go through a certain movement of art and then all of a sudden things become tired and then the pendulum swings in another direction. And my friend Alice is a photographer and she's actually now doing her photography in film. You know, so there's been like a switch away from the digital towards, you know, it's just kind of, you do something for a while, it grows tired, you start to see some of the flaws in it, and then you kind of swing back. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. But just in case you think I'm old-fashioned and provincial, let me quote Picasso. He was trained by his father, a teacher in the Spanish art academy. Today, we are in the unfortunate position of having no order or canon whereby all artistic production is submitted to rules. They, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, did. Their canon was inescapable because beauty, so-called, was by definition contained in those rules, which like the canons of proportion, which I was referring to. But as soon as art had lost all language traditions and the kind of liberation which came with Impressionism, permitting every painter to do what he wanted, painting was finished. Painters no longer live within a tradition, and so each one of us must recreate an entire language. No criteria can be applied to him a priori since we don't believe in rigid standards any longer. In a certain sense, it's a liberation, but at the same time, it's an enormous limitation. Because when the individuality of the artist begins to express himself, what the artist gains in the way of liberty, he loses in the way of order. And when you're no longer to attach yourself to an order, basically that's very bad. So in summary, I think I've already said this or alluded to it. The driving force behind the Atelier movement is a desire to preserve the body of artistic knowledge, techniques, and methods that have evolved from the ancient Greeks to the Renaissance in 19th century France, and to continue to evolve the art with art, in other words, skill, and search for beauty into the future and not let any of this knowledge get lost. So I think there are, at the ateliers, we find people that are obsessed with academic art. I mean, at the place where I studied, there were teachers there that actually collected 19th century French figure paintings and drawings that were done in the ateliers. They went out and searched for these things and bought them. They read all these books. They just studied extensively, and they just, all they want to do is academic art. And my feeling is I love Impressionism. I'm going to continue to incorporate Impressionism into my art, but I want to have this knowledge, this base, and I loved learning the slow form of art, which informs the alla prima, the quick art. Everybody loves fresh, loose art, but if you don't have the fundamental structure underneath, then it can be, the finished result can be a little unsatisfying, especially if you're doing a portrait or a figure. So working long, spending 80 hours on a drawing or 80 hours on a painting or even 20 hours on a painting, and then going back and doing a quick portrait sketch and going back and forth, it's really helped me. The long painting and drawing has really helped my quick painting and drawing, which I love the quick. I was telling Liz yesterday that the portrait sketch is my favorite thing to do because it's just so fresh. But I've got to learn the anatomy. I've got to become familiar. I mean, I don't know how many people at Barbara's presentation, but wow, she made a painting in skyscape look easy, didn't she? I mean, she could get that thing out, scared me half to death, because I knew I was coming up after her. But she kept her thing. She studied clouds for years and years and years, and she painted many, many clouds, and she could paint them in her sleep. So So she can do a beautiful skyscape in 1 hour because she has studied nature for years and studied clouds specifically and teaches, classes on how to fly. So, let me see the time. I think it started on dinner at 1. Okay, so I gotta get going. I'm not gonna get into too much detail about my program because I've got information here about it, but basically what Grand Central Atelier offers is a 2-year core program with an optional 3 additional years of residency, which I obviously didn't do. We were at a point in life where my husband was able to work remotely, so he came out and worked remotely and went back and forth to Birmingham. We had a great time. And then in addition to that, we have part-time programs and workshops, and the quality of the instruction is incredible. The teachers are really, really good. And now, due to COVID, they're teaching Zoom classes. So we finished up in last March, and we were supposed to finish in May, so we finished Zoom in May, and I continue to take classes until the spring. I plan to go back and take more classes that really involved with their Zoom instruction. The video quality has gotten really good, the format's gotten really good. The last workshop I did with them, the monitor was in Hong Kong, Dale, the teacher, was in Paris. We had somebody from South Alabama that was in class, and it was just amazing. So the first year is all drawing, and the second year is all painting. And the core program is 40 hours a week. And in addition to that, most of those students took evening part-time classes and weekend part-time classes. So for a portion of the time I was there, I was in there from 8:30 to 5 every day, took an hour for dinner, and 6 to 9 Monday through Thursday at night, doing part-time class, and then Sunday for 6 hours before the sketch. I had to send my dog and my cat home with my husband when I was doing it because it was, it was really exhausting. But that's kind of typical for life in New York. Anyway, it was a great experience. So just real quickly to run through, and I've got details here on exactly what we studied, but we did morning and afternoon sessions, 8-hour days, all from life and north-facing light, cast drawings, bar drawings. We went to the drawing room with the net and got to see precious drawings that are too precious to be out. We got to see the living symbol by Michelangelo, which can only be exposed to the light for 20 minutes a day because it's so fragile, and that was really amazing. I got a photograph of it there. Every week we had art history lessons from the art history professor at Parsons School of Design in New York, which is a very famous design school. And then we did figure drawing after we got through the bar drawings and cast drawings. We learned how to do something called a 3-day walk-in, and then we did 4-week poses, which means spent 80 hours on one drawing. We had perspective classes, anatomy classes, we learned theories of light and shadow, and then we did portrait sketch once a week. And then year 2 for painting, we took that 3-day walk-in that we learned first year, and we did what's called indirect painting, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, but probably haven't studied. So we did the drawing, the 3-day drawing, in a form called block-in, which gives you just enough information to paint on top of. Then you actually transfer that drawing onto your painting surface. Instead of, I think most of you out here that are painters probably just do drawing with paint and immediately on the canvas. That's called direct painting. It's kind of a modern way is kind of derived from impressionism, but this way you spend a lot of time getting the anatomy right, getting the points, the tilts, all the things that make your figure look real and believable. And you transfer those onto your painting surface, and then you don't have to worry about the drawing anymore. I mean, you may lose a little bit. And then after that, you apply something called a grisaille, which is a grisaille. You can do it like with positive application of paint, or you can put like a neutral wash and then lift out your light. So you end up with a tonal light and dark painting. So then you don't have to worry about your body structure. You've got the lights, you've got the darks. You can actually get really refined with the side to where you've gotten quite a few values in there. So then you start your painting, and then you just focus on the application of paint, and it just makes that part of it a lot more fun, because you've got all those problems solved ahead of time. So that's it. And then before I get started, I guess I need to get started, but I just wanted to tell you a few fun facts about living in New York. One of the things I didn't realize about New York is it's an island. I mean, we know it's an island, but you don't think about it as being an island. But I lived really close to the waterfront and learned that there are parks and restaurants and bars and all kinds of fun things along the waterfront, all over Jersey, Queens, and Manhattan waterfront. And my favorite mode of transportation, please, you know, the ferry. They have a ferry service that will pick you up at different points along the water. And so since I live really close to the waterfront, if I could take the ferry someplace, I would take the ferry. It beats the subway. And then the other thing that you don't really realize about New York is, and BB's son's going to learn this in Boston, 6 months out of the year, it's consistently freezing and gray. It's not like every once in a while, it's like every day. You've got to wear a puffer, and you've got to wear a scarf and a hat and gloves, and you're still in the freeze. So, I mean, there are a lot of fun things to do in New York, but you have to do them in 6 months. And then the other thing is that I know everybody's been to the Met, right? It's from Museum of Art, but I didn't realize how endless the offerings of the Met are. I could go over and over and over and over again and still wonder. It's just incredible. Life is exhilarating with endless opportunities. It's very challenging and very exhausting. And they have this weird tradition in certain circles called after dinner table talk. Has anybody ever run into that in New York before? Well, nobody warned us, but we went to a dinner party with like Yale people, because my husband's best friend in college, his wife went to Yale, so so after dinner, they had a topic of conversation, and you go around the room and you have to talk about this topic of conversation. There's no discussion. Have you heard of this, Louise? You go around the room and you just talk about this one thing, and nobody told us about it. And the thing was like, what were you reading? And I was reading the book that everybody in New York read 3 years ago. And my husband doesn't read periods. It was like totally humiliating. And then the other thing about New York is there's no salt anywhere. You can't find a salt shaker anywhere. There's no salt in the food. It's just devoid of salt. But you can find a cauliflower option for any cauliflower. And then the other thing is everyone wears sneakers every day. So supposedly it's a fashionable place, and it is fashionable, but 6 months out of the year, it's not fashionable, and people are always. Okay, so that's all I have to say. Now I'm going to start my demo, and what I'm going to focus on is talking to you about 2 things. I can't really do a painting in an hour. I'm just going to tell you. I tried to go ahead and get started, but the light's totally different. So this is my version that I did at home. But this took me probably 8 hours to do. So I'll be lucky if I can get one in there. So I don't even have an hour. But what I want to teach you is, first of all, I want to talk about the value of doing studies and sketches. Everybody knows what studies and sketches are, and it was a requirement on every painting that we did. We had to do studies. And what studies do is they help you work out the problems ahead of time. You can, if you're wondering about how you're going to do one thing in your painting, if you could do a little study, you can work it out and make a decision. And then by the time you start your painting, it's all worked out. You can work out your background colors, you can work out your color palette, you can work out your color vibration. You can establish and connect your shadow shades and your overall composition, find your anchor and shadow shade. So I've got a bunch of studies here. This painting right here of the bread that's on the wall here are some studies that I did. I was trying different, so this is a value study. This is kind of a design. It's a value study. Here I was working a little bit on what to do with the cloth. You can see that I ended up moving the cloth and move this a little bit. Here's another study I did. This painting, I think, is somewhere hanging somewhere, but it ended up looking like this, but I did this study because I was thinking about maybe, this is a wipe out design. This is where you lift the color off. This is where you paint in different shades of gray.
Can you put it up a little bit?
Sure, I can pass it around if you'd like to see it, but the painting ended up being this way, but it just allowed me to work out different issues. You can pass that around. And then recently I did I entered a commission competition at the Song Club and did a ton of studies. I can't really pass them around because I've got to send them to New York for meeting and it. But like this is my son who modeled for me. This is a study. This is my neighbor, like that. I don't know if you know Alan or that, but this is her daughter. She modeled for me. And then this is a compositional study. It was for doors at the South Bend Public Library. Here are the drawings that I did. And then I had a ballet dancer who modeled for me. She's representing the muses. That it was I don't want to go into too much, but it was an allegorical painting. So I used the 9 muses of Greek mythology, and she was my list. So anyway, I do studies all the time. They're fun to do and they're super helpful. So now I guess I have no choice to do this. Okay, so I use these rosemary evergreen long flats. And the first thing I'm going to do is my drawing. I started on this, but the light's in a totally different place. So one of the things that you need to know about an onion is that you can measure the height and you can measure the width and they'll be equal, but it's not perfectly round. So what you do is you want to get the points. And when I say the point, I mean you want to get the point where you can see where that touches. So you see that your farthest out point is right here. It's not necessarily in the middle. And that way you can perfectly get the asymmetry because there's a pattern to an onion where it's broad at the top and then it's more narrow at the bottom, and it enables you to get that shape down pat. So what I would do if I'm starting over is I would, first of all, like this is off because I wanted to emphasize the shadow shift. Okay, I wanted to build the shadow so it's a little bit to the left on purpose. But the first thing I would do is I would establish the outer boundary of my painting. And then the top boundary, which is going to be here today. And then I would look at the distance. I don't like to use too much turf because it makes it hard to control, and it also doesn't smell very well. Okay, so I've got my bottommost point here. I've got my outermost point here. I've got my topmost point, going to come up that right here. And I'm more interested in finding these points than I am the roundness and getting that overall round shape first. So I'm trying to get that unique shape of the. Okay, and then this one's way over here. This is about 10 minutes on this draw, and then we'll talk to you about the next thing this year. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do, now that I've kind of got this drawing blocked in, is I'm going to, look at okay, so what's beautiful about, can anybody tell me what's unusual about my setup as far as the colors go? Yeah, it's a very compressed value range. So it's a very compressed value range. Everything's light. Like there's not anything really super dark in this painting. And one of the biggest problems in doing, it's called a high key painting, but one of the biggest challenges in doing a high key painting is to keep those darks light enough. So the way I overcome that is something that I learned at GCA, which is called making a string. I'm going to show you how to do this, how to make a string on your palette so that you know that you're staying in the right value range. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a string. And a string is a great thing. I don't do that. Has anybody ever heard of a string? A string before? Where have you learned about that?
What comes to mind is Terry Strickland here.
Oh, does she teach a string? Okay. So it unifies your color palette. It helps you find your color vibration. It helps you find nuanced colors. It helps you uphold your value structure. It organizes your palette. I mean, how many of us, I know I used to do this, when you're doing a painting, you've got a million little blobs of different colors all over your palette, and it's like super chaotic. So it organizes your palette and it relates your colors to each other, and it's a dress rehearsal for your painting. So, I mean, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my shadow shade, my shadow color. Which is kind of different than what oh, and then the other thing, oh yeah, I forgot the other thing I was going to say. I'm probably going to start painting, but so what does anybody have an observation about these onions? Like, do you notice something about these onions what would characterize these onions? And maybe you don't know even what I'm talking about. I won't make you guess to that. So they're translucent, right? So you want to be really careful to use translucent, transparent paints. You might be real tempted to use that extra pale, that extra pale yellow white color. Like you might be really tempted to use that because you can see it in there. But if you look at the label on that paint, it's maybe titanium, which is your more opaque white. So instead, you just want to stick to I use lead white. I guess there's probably a non-lead alternative that's transparent. But you want to use a more transparent white. So basically, your color palette is always going to be red, yellow, and blue with white. But there are a million different reds, a million different yellows. And so my red is trans red oxide. I got a bunch of yellows because I'm seeing a bunch of yellow here. I've got a little cadmium, I've got yellow ochre, I've got transparent yellow oxide, I've got raw sienna, trans red oxide, I don't remember all these colors. Oh, I put 2 trans red oxides. Then I've got ultramarine blue, and I put cobalt violet in here just because I've got so much yellow, and cobalt violet is the complement. But I wasn't really seeing purple. But the good news is cobalt violet was so incredibly transparent that you just almost can't even see the purple at all. So I'm gonna go back and forth between the ultramarine and cobalt violet. So for my shadow color, I'm seeing blue. I'm seeing a little bit of raw umber, which is the great neutralizer. And I'm seeing, of course, tons of white. And let's just get started with this. And I see that that's really, really cool. And what I have learned from painting white things is that shadows of white objects very often have raw sienna. process. Just a little bit of it, so.
Is there a reason you're painting the shadows first?
Well, I'm not painting yet. I'm starting with my darkest value, but you can do it any way you want. Oh, there's no one way to do it. There are artists that start in the middle, Sargent started in the middle, there are artists that start with the lights. There's no rule, you can do what you want. So now that I've made this color, I can see it's not quite high enough. And then when I add it light, then it's getting cool again, right? So then I want to add more, I'm going to add a little bit of this trans yellow oxide. So what I'm trying to do is I want to get my darkest dark color already here. I want to get my lightest light, and I want to give it a mid-tone to it.
So you're doing the string.
So I'm doing the string. Okay, so that to me like it looks like a pretty color. It's not quite light. I have a tendency to just go nuts and overdo it with it. You got to be really patient when you're trying to design the light these colors, and I get impatient and I just really wobble. Okay, so I'm going to actually say that part of it is something. Okay. All right, so I'm feeling fairly good about it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my light, I'm going to go down here, and I'm just going to bring it up and make a little value range here. So that I've got a little room to maneuver because it's not all one constant.
Are you just smearing it down the palette?
Yeah, I'm just making the strings going this way where I'm taking this one color and I'm getting lighter and lighter. And now usually what happens is you have a temperature change. Like you don't have just one color and it goes all the way to white. Usually your temperature is going to start changing. So if your shadow is warm, then by the time you get up here, you're going to be getting cool. And I'm just going to go on to that right here. And I can't promise I can get it put back together, but I'll leave it up here for you. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over here. I'm going to make my lightest light, which is very light. It's got yellow in it. I'm seeing that it's got yellow. So I'm going to try yellow. Not adding too much. But I even see a little bit of that. So I'm going to have to add a bunch of whites to this. Get my whites. So now I'm making a little string here of this. And I blob too much paint because I'm getting a little impatient. But okay, so this is just really, really light. And it's one of those situations where it's never going to be as light as it really is. And if I go all the way to white, then I'm going to use that one primer. So I'm going to have to stop with this color right here. Now, then I've got my mid-tone. So I've got kind of a, I've got this for my shadow. So my mid-tone is going to be a temperature shift. And it looks to me like it's a little bit cooler. And I actually just kind of look down here at my eyes to see what color it is. Got a lot of that. I'm going to use a little bit of this. Ultramarine.
I have a really dumb question.
Yes.
Is a string where you take one color and then mix it and make it lighter and lighter, lighter as it goes up?
Is that the value?
Simplistically, that's what you're doing, but in reality, you're gonna, as you move up, you may add other colors to it, because usually what happens is you're gonna have a temperature change. So maybe it's gonna be more towards the blue in the dark, and then as you go lighter, you're gonna find yourself adding yellow. Like when I use a skin tone string, my darkest shadow is like a warm brown, and then the mid-tone is more like a warm reddish yellow, and then when you get up to the highlights of the skin, it's a cool pink, like a cool pinkish color. So it's not a straight, you are adding white, you're making a higher value, but you're very sensitive to looking at other colors that could be in there, temperature changes. And you don't have to mix it perfectly. You can add into it as you go. Okay, so I feel okay about this, but there is something darker over here. There's some red. So I do start with my darks, and the reason I like to start with my darks is because I feel like connecting the shadow shapes is a big compositional element in your painting. So I like to go ahead and do that first. So the first thing I see is there's this really dark. I mean, it's not really dark. I've got to be careful not to make it too dark. So it's very warm. And it's right here, and I feel like this is the color right here. So I'm moving into the shadow color. It's much warmer. It's right here. So I've got that in there, and then I'm going to start moving into this shadow color right here. I'm getting lighter. So look. So you notice I'm using kind of smallish brushes. Actually, I'm seeing a little bit of that purple now. So I'm going to add this purple, but again, it's really, really subtle. The purple.
Can you lower your left hand down a little bit?
Thank you. Yeah, and if you guys can just get up and move in, just go right ahead. You can move around if you want to get in a better spot if you can't see where you are.
Do you use the same English for both painting?
I don't. So to me, there are two parts of the painting that are really important. One is that core shadow. And so I'm going to use a small brush there, and then when I define things, I'm going to use a smaller brush. But once I get out of that core shadow, then I don't have to be, like the value's not changing constantly. But I'm really, see, now that I've come in with this cool color, and I'm looking at this shadow shape, I see the lavender in it. So I'm adding yellow to it, which is kind of a compliment. I'm pretty pleased with that color, and I'm pretty pleased that it looks translucent. So now I'm going to go ahead and do it. And I'm actually seeing that it's very dark right here. I'm going to add purple. Let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
How brush are you using?
This is a number 2 of the Evergreen Long Flats. I like these because they're soft, but they're not like super soft. To me, a lot of people like the ivories, the ivory flats, but to me, they're just too, I find them to be too firm. So I'm starting to, Now I'm starting to see that yellow purple that I, in my head, felt like it was there, but I didn't see it, and now I'm starting to see it. Okay, so now I've got my shadow shape in there. But I'm gonna go ahead and do my edges around it, because I've learned the hard way, don't go back on your edges. Do your edges as you go. It's just so much easier. It doesn't seem like it's easier, but it really is. So one of the things I want to do, okay, so my value study, this kind of study that I did, and then I did another one right here. Probably another time. So you see how much more pleasing the background is on this one than this one? The bottom one, don't you think that the background's more pleasing? So I toned my canvas on this one. And when I did this one, I thought, why would I tone my canvas when I've got a white background? I'm still leave the background white and not put it in there. But by toning my canvas, it just somehow I put a light on top of it, and it just ended up with a richer.
What color did you tone it?
Well, I usually tone with, I tone with lots of different things, but I think I toned this with raw umber. But I think you want to tone your canvas with a neutral color that has a quality you want a hint of, but you don't want the whole thing. And then you would go over your background with something that's a different color, and then you've got the other showing through. Like I might use, a lot of times I'll use burnt umber and black together, or I might use yellow ochre and raw umber. And the one on the bottom will show through just a little bit, and you can wipe it and make it really thin. But so I'm going to go ahead and start putting in this here so that I can get my edges nice and fresh, and they're not going to be, because the longer you paint, the more you paint. And I'm not going to put myself in the category of master artist when I say this, but the more edges become an issue, and having them not too soft, not too hard, but just right. It's just the key. And you can't really, it's so much harder to do when you've already got dry paint. So I just want, even if I'm just going to do the edges and I'll make a little blank, I'm going to just go ahead and start working on those edges. And I love when Barbara did her demo, and she took, what was that, a rake, and she just kind of went through it, and it looked great. It looked really good. She's definitely been preoccupied with edges as well. So the light's also changing, but we're getting into. Okay, so do you see what I'm doing with my string? I'm borrowing, I'm going this way, and I'm also going this way. So I'm going this way to bring other, this is where you get your color vibration, because a color vibration is nothing more than a chroma shift with no value shift. Maybe you're going to use a complement, maybe you're going to use a warm or cool, but you're going to not shift value, but you're just going to have side-by-side colors in the same value. So, that you can do that going this way, or you can either dab over, but see how I'm starting to get kind of a rich array of colors in here by using this string. But you're never going back to your other colors, you're just using what you made. No, I will constantly go back. And that's the, you mean go back here? Yeah, because I'm not totally redoing colors. I'm leaving a little bit of what I had before and just moving off in another direction, and that's kind of why it's called a string. It's like you keep your core, but then you're just moving off in another direction. And that way, you can go back to your old color, and you can modify to the extent that you need to. You can unify your color scheme. Okay, so now I'm seeing some darkness. I need to get out my small brush. What brush is that? This is my zero. This is my drawing brush. This is the same thing. It's that evergreen long flat. But okay, here's the thing about what brush to use. You've got to use the brush that has the qualities that help you paint the way you want to paint. So a lot of people like broken color. If you like broken color, don't use these brushes. They're too soft. I'm not going to use the ivory glass. A lot of people like really mottled paint. Don't use these brushes. Use a sable. For example, that really refined paint, man in the suit back here with the red tie, that's really refined. So that guy used a lot of sables. Then you got Dan's painting right here, and it's very loose, and he's probably using, using iron glass and maybe fillers and all that. But by the way, a lot of times when we see a loose painting like this, and I'm not saying that Dan does this, but a lot of painters do this. They start out with something maybe not that type or like that, and in the end they will go in and put loose brush strokes for the effect on the pen. Because you see, he's a master of the structure. That drawing is really there. And you can't just get up there with a big brush and get that like that. I mean, some people do it. But I think a lot of times they come in at the end and add that. Has anybody ever heard that before, going in at the end and adding that? It sounds really hard though, to add them at the end. Mm-hmm.
But do it everywhere.
But I mean, if you look at some of these paintings, like over the, you'll have that one big stroke that just goes like that. It's perfect. And I don't know how you can do that one perfect stroke if you haven't got the structure there. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just one. I think I've heard that people do that. I think I've heard that somewhere. Maybe. Okay. So I'm working on my edges here. Okay, so my light source. So my light source is coming from there. So my shadows are obviously moving to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and start my shadow shape right here. You can see a lot of light right here. I see that's such a nice color. I just think I'm getting it. Now that I've got that in there, now I'm getting lighter. But I'm just going to go ahead and lay that in for the purpose of getting my edges taken care of. And I'm going to get concerned about my shadow shape, but not that. So now I'm going to just go ahead and move into my number 2. Now I'm going to do this. Excuse me. Now I'm going to take this mid-tone color. I'm going to start. So do you see how when you lay this out like this, it keeps you from going in and making a super, super dark color that's just going to ruin the delicate, translucent nature of these onions? I know I can't go any darker than right here. I know that this is only a tiny little spot here.
Or is that a texture you want to show color?
You can't see the palette? Okay, let's take a break after we just get on the palette. But that's what I'm trying to teach you, just during it, you can't see it. You Are you Jacob Collins, the guy that started our school, he loves media. And I tried it and I really love it too. Here, it's called French Marriage. It stinks and I don't know if you ever gone to natural people website. It works really well. It works really well. I was get called separation.
I think that's spring.
What's in it? There's something in it. I mean, it's right. It's just right. I saw it. Okay, so the other thing I want to do okay, so another thing I want to do is I see a really light place right here, and I want to go ahead and get this in. This is a very cool that I do the onion. We've got this super light reflection, purple light. And we're going to start getting now the show. Actually, the lights changes here because we started at noon when the sun was directly overhead, and now it's moving to the west, which is that way, right? So the sun was here, and now it's starting to move. Can you not hear me? Yeah, we can hear. So now what I'm doing is I am, now what I'm doing is I'm comparing adjacent colors. Okay. So right now, my background looks pretty dark right here compared to my onion. It gets lighter right here. You guys can better tell me.
Yeah. But we can hear you.
But it does, it's loud.
Am I too loud?
No.
Is it, you can turn it on? Yeah. Turn the air back on, it's not because it's so loud, but still can't hear her over the air, let me know.
Okay, so I've got kind of dark there, and now I'm going to come in. So this looks pretty dark here, and this looks really, really light here. Yes. also, if I had all the time in the world, I would be refining my drawing as I go. I don't really have that much time. But I would be like really running my brush over here to see where it's at in the house. I didn't think this was wide enough, but now that, no, but I'm not really using it like. You've got a good brown wet going on, you know, and you've got paint that's got some flow to it. You don't use that much, but then things start to go on. Or maybe you're not using the paint. So like I feel like Williamsburg is really thick, you know.
You have a favorite brand?
Well, I'm kind of loyal to it. I like Murphey because we sell it in art, but I really like
You like what?
Michael Harding. But then again, like Michael Harding is very, has a lot of flow to it. It has a lot of flow to it, which works for me, but when I used to paint with palette knife, it's like Williamsburg because it has a lot of body. I just try to use paint that's made with linseed oil, mixed with linseed oil instead of having a lot of fillers. Talking with that speech, I gave my speech and I said, so this is my most light basic point right here. I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to start, so that's right here. Now I'm going to start moving this way towards my midterm. I'm literally just going to fall over in this direction. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to fall over this direction. I'm going to my lightest light term. This is my midterm. So see how I'm kind of falling over? I'm not making huge jumps from my lightest light over to this midterm. I'm just slowly but surely crawling over so that I'm keeping the form. Oh yeah, that's the big thing that they teach you is the form and modeling form. So you don't make huge jumps. Then you can, you know, face it down. I told you I was going to add, so if I get some more here, so as I move to the midterm, I'm finding actually pretty pleased. As you
you how to pick up something and you're moving things from the light to the dark, you're also pulling a loop into the dark. You know what I mean? So I just wondered, do you ever have to do a ministry?
No, because I tried really hard to preserve the darkest dark and the lightest light, and not hold, like, once I've established this is my darkest dark, I don't like add any light to that whatsoever. Like, I might add a yellow or green or some other color, a little bit, but I don't want to change that value. I want to preserve that value.
I just wondered if you were using their point of on your brush to put on, you ever have a shift.
Well, yeah, I have it, but so what I end up with is a lot of colors. So I don't mix it to where it used to be this color and now it's this color. Instead, I'm only doing a little bit at a time because, you know, the form is turning. I'm not making a big flat shape for the light, a big flat shape for the dark. I'm recognizing that this is lighter than this is lighter than this is lighter than this. So I'm only mixing a tiny little amount of paint right here. Okay, let's do that. So, what you end up with is a whole lot of paint colors to choose from. You're painting a lot of because you've got a lot, and you'll see, you can come up here at any time, but you'll see that we've actually got a lot of colors in here. I'm not overly mixing a huge, large portion of paint that's gonna turn into a big mud that I can't refine. Does that make sense? Yeah. And if you want to come up anytime, like I said, I'm not going to finish a masterpiece today, and if you want to come up and take a look. So here's my midtone color right here. Okay. And see, it's pretty light here because my light facing is here, and then it gets darker here. So it comes up about like this. And I never jump from here to here. I have to take baby steps, always, with my strength. And that keeps my form going. Unless I'm moving to a completely different part of the paint. So I'm getting darker here, I'm getting darker. Now I'm going to start moving into that shadow color. You see, I'm just crawling from my midtone over to here. So it's not a big dramatic shift. Working my way across the shadow shift.
So will you kind of finish that onion before you move on?
I was thinking that, like, if I could finish one onion, but I don't have to. That's the plan, Susie.
But that's how you paint, like you usually kind of finish one thing before you move to the next.
Now, when I'm gonna finish my edges, like, I'm gonna get some background in here.
Yeah, you're not going to neglect everything around it.
No, because I learned my lesson the hard way, and it's hard. Okay, so one thing I'm noticing is this is really warm here, and this is really cooling down. And then I want to talk a little bit about painting loose versus painting tight. And to me, the difference between painting loose and painting tight should always be time.
So the longer it should be tighter.
Yeah, the less time you have, the more you're going to focus on big shadow shapes and just freshness of expression. And then the more time you have, you can go in and you can refine and you can make all the transitions more subtle. And that's Laura Murphy's. That's not everything I've ever read.
I really should finish now.
Now I'm going to kind of shadow shed. And there are other artists that go in and that's the first thing they do is to find the shadow shed. But I kind of like to just lay out the boundaries and then establish the boundaries for the shadow. Dark is right here. And your edges are always going to be darker. The light's changing like every minute. Too. So now what I'm doing is I'm kind of massaging my values. I'm making my lightest light lighter. And I define that shadow shed. Now what I'm going to do is put in this little thing. I feel like definitely I'm moving up, even in this tiny little space here, I'm moving up, following the boundaries, starting up here and moving up, just bit by bit in this direction to preserve my. So I also have this series 279 long flat, just kind of like a tiny little pond. And So actually, my highlight's right here. Right here. I always lay my highlights in super thick in texture. Because it physically reflects more light. You guys heard that before, is that old news to you? You heard that before, that you're laying your highlights really thick in texture to actually reflect more light. So I'm gonna lean more towards that than to do what's actually there. I want it to be. A little bit past time, but if you want to keep painting a little bit, that's fine. Anyone who wants to kind of stay, just watch it kind of finish up and make some more points. That's totally fine. If you have any last I've got wisdoms to share, you have a closing statement? Yeah, I do. I wanna pass out.
Okay, we can help you do that. Let Phoebe and Emily do that while you keep painting. That's fine.
I want to explain what so what I've got here is I've got a list of artists that you can follow on Instagram. That I recommend for really good examples of this kind of art and master. Then I've got a description of my course schedule and all the different things that we learned. And here's a reading list if you're interested in any of the books, the historical books and reference material. And here's a little bit of information about the Met Drawing Room. If you ever want to go to the Met Drawing Room, all you have to do is call and make an appointment. And you make a list of the drawings that you want to see, and you can in there and we'll put out the drawings.
How do you know what that happens?
There's a catalog. I can see that I put pictures of the ones that we saw, which include the Libyan sitting right here, and And then finally, this is an article that's in New Yorker about Jacob Collins, who started the school that I'm in. So Jacob Collins was interviewed by this art writer from New Yorker. It's kind of ironic what we were talking about. Felt like an imposter because he wrote that art and we were reading that. So anyway, that's what's in here if you're interested. And thank you all for coming out. Again, where do you want to come home with the branch? You're welcome to.
We're doing the 20% awards. If you haven't signed up for next month, the last lunch and learn of the month will be with Marjorie Hicks. She's an artist out of Nashville, really great artist. I'm excited to have her. Marcy, that'll be on the 19th, I think it's the third Thursday in August. So if you want to sign up for that one, see Emily at the Big Dress before you go. And that'll be the last one of the summer before we go for our fall. And if you're not on our mailing list, make sure you fill out a thing because we'll have some shows coming up in the fall. We're doing a sporting and wildlife show in September, and then we do Tiny Treasures and something special around Christmas. So thank y'all for coming. And thank you. Take brownies on your way. Maybe kind of just breaking down some tables while I have some help, but don't make that, feel like you need to move or leave or anything. Thank y'all for coming.
I know. Dark to light.
And, as you keep painting, the string tends to get darker.